of global insights at Frog Design. And I specialize in figuring out what's happening on the ground and looking for innovations in the opportunities in the innovation space. Most of that is to do with what users of services are doing with the things that have been designed or might be designed in the future. My talk will focus in on the kind of user perspective, and then I'm going to hand over to Carol for the very difficult and thorny subject of implementation, among other things. So there are 8.6 billion humans on the planet, and there are approximately 5 billion cellular subscribers, and that's the estimate for the end of the year. And we're in an industry that sells approximately 1.2 billion cell phones per year. So everyone here has an idea of what a cell phone is. If you want to do it in sheer numbers alone, this is what a cell phone looks like. It's not the thing in your pocket. This is what most people on the planet consider to be a cell phone. It's got a black and white screen. Maybe it's got a color screen. It supports voice calls and text messaging. It's got an alarm clock. It includes the world's most played game, which is called Snake, that ships with every handset. And this is people's idea of what a cell phone is. And also, if it breaks, it's highly likely that there's someone in your community who can fix it. And often they cannibalize existing devices that are broken to get spare parts for it. So this is what a cell phone is, not what you have in your hands today. And something that I've learned, for better or for worse, is that pretty much every human being aspires to owning their own personal mobile phone, which is great if you're a cell phone manufacturer, but that's the situation. And many people aspire to owning more than one. And it's worth pointing out what the difference between personal ownership and shared ownership, or using a public call office such as this. So what's the difference? And the main difference is convenience. So if you personally own one, you don't need to go through someone else. When you need to make a call or communicate, you have it on you. And convenience also includes cost effectiveness and privacy. So if you go to that public call office, your communication is generally overheard by someone else. So convenience and privacy are the two big differences if you own your own personal device compared to the alternatives. And one of the assumptions when we talk about transactions is that every part of the transaction process should be secret, should be private to the user. And something that I've learned over time is, whilst that's mostly true, things like bank balances, knowing where the money is going and so on, it's not exclusively true. And there are actually opportunities to design systems where some of the transactions are definitely private, but there are other aspects to them, to the transaction process, that can be shared amongst strangers or other people in the process. And this is critically important in this space because of illiteracy. So many of our consumers are illiterate, and they're using devices that have textual interfaces, and they don't necessarily understand exactly the parameters of how they're using them. In the research that I've done into illiteracy, I found that instead of just talking about illiteracy, which this community recognizes is critically important, to instead talk about competency. So not talking about illiteracy, but competency. So what does a user need to know for any given task to be able to complete that task in any given context? So illiteracy, understanding the big issues around illiteracy is well enough. But just from the point of view of getting something done, what do they need to know in any given context? And that's the smarter question. And if someone's motivation, for example, is simply to be connected, that someone can communicate with them, all you need to know to be literate in that is how to charge your phone, how to turn it on, and how to press the little green button when it rings. And that's it. Your needs are met. And I've met many people and that's their sole motivation. And once those needs are met, That's it. They don't care about the technology anymore. They get on with the rest of their life. So there's a lot of people here who are very engaged with the technology, but from a user perspective, there are limits to that engagement. So what does it mean to be, for example, financially literate? Or what are the competencies that are required to complete a very basic financial transaction? And I always think it's worth thinking about this in the context, in all the different contexts that it's in, because there is no one answer to this. There are just many different answers depending on the context. And I'm also reminded that sometimes the people that our users turn to when they're trying to get advice on matters to do with finance aren't necessarily themselves literate. It's an incredibly confusing landscape, and this advertisement actually is from the media in India, just one small example. So something I've learned from the research is, or one of the assumptions I had from the research was that illiterate consumers would really struggle to use devices that had textual interfaces. And one of the things that we learned was that illiterate people were making calls, they were receiving calls, they were sometimes sending text messages. They were certainly using other features on the device, like they were playing games and using the alarm clock. And a simple question is, how and why? And one of the first things that I've learned is that if a user is sufficiently motivated, they can learn pretty much anything. And the first question is, what would motivate them sufficiently to want to learn something? I've just moved to China, and one of my goals is to learn some Chinese. And part of that motivation is, how motivated am I? We can all learn Chinese in this room, but how motivated are we, right? It's a choice, and there are trade-offs. And it's the same with absolutely everything that we're designing for our users as well. The second thing that I've learned is that for tasks that users really want to do, but they struggle to do because they don't really have the skills or the literacy, typically the solution is something that's called proximate literacy. I don't know how to do it, but I would turn to my literate friend who does know. And there's a cost to that. The cost is convenience. Maybe you return a day later and I have to wait until that point to be able to tap your knowledge. And there's a lack of privacy as well. But illiterate consumers and users are very good at overcoming these barriers. They've developed quite sophisticated strategies for doing so. And proximate literacy is, if you think also in terms of financial literacy, who are we turning to? On a very human level, who do we turn to for advice? And what are the flows of that information, for example, through communities? Another lesson, an important lesson I've learned from many years of this research is that we look at a mobile phone, and if you look at that very basic mobile phone I showed you in the beginning, our assumption is that if someone owns something like that, they're using it for voice calls, they're using it for text messages. And I've learned to separate ownership of an object from what we assume is its intended use. And I think probably the most critical area for this is in if there is, for consumers who are severely financially constrained, if there is any opportunity to find a cheaper way or more cost-effective way to do something, they will use it, and your service be damned. So if you design a service from end to end and they're happy with the first two parts, but there's one bit where you're expecting them to spend some money, and there's someone in the neighborhood who can help them do that for more cheaply, more cost-effectively, they will use that. I like to think of the BOP consumers as being some of the most critical consumers on the planet, and often they're not treated as such. Another area of interest is app stores, and there's a lot of kind of interest in the US market in particular about application stores on various platforms, and it's seen as a big differentiator. From my perspective, these app stores are in many ways catching up with what has been happening on the ground in emerging markets in terms of corner shop app stores. And these are the guys, and sometimes women, that there's often one in a community that has access to a laptop and increasingly a netbook, and the prices of netbooks are dropping considerably. They have access to content, ringtones, wallpapers, applications, antivirus software, movies that are being converted for a mobile phone format, and people come to them and they ask for content. And these places are often social hubs, and these corner shop app stores are in many ways, these corner shop app stores are in many ways the content mediators for their community. And I like to, they very rarely have internet connectivity themselves, but all they need to know is someone, somewhere, who has had connectivity to download content. And these are kiosks. They're run by micro-entrepreneurs who have an acute understanding of what their customers want, because that's their business model. They often run other stores, like grocery stores, and they just have a laptop perched in the corner. And if a customer comes in and asks for a ringtone, what the latest Bollywood song is, or whatever, they're more likely to hang around and talk and buy other things. So they play a really important role within those communities. And they tend to, because they need to, have a reasonable level of technical competence, just the basic stuff. So if things go wrong with the services that people are using, that sometimes they can turn to these corner shop app stores. So we talk of user literacy, and in terms of what do our users understand. And the last point I'll make today before handing over to Carol is the kind of issue of our literacy of users. So what do we really understand about the people that we're designing for? And there's an assumption to treat them homogeneously, that BOP is BOP. But within that, you've got status-seeking teenagers, you've got entrepreneurs, you've got social explorers, you've got pragmatists, you've got many different kind of segments within that. And so my question to you is, what do we know about the people that we're designing for? And with that, I'd like to hand over to Carol.